Imagine thousands of people lining the streets in Vienna. It's 1827, and schools are closed. Everybody's holding torches.
Wow. Sounds like a big event.
It's a huge funeral procession. But this wasn't for a king or an emperor. This was for a composer.
For a composer, who were we talking about?
Ludwig van Beethoven.
Hmm.
Makes you wonder, right? Why was his passing such a monumental event?
Especially compared to Mozart's death just a few decades earlier. His funeral was pretty quiet, wasn't it?
Exactly. So today we're going to dive deep into Beethoven's life and legacy. This guy redefined what it meant to be a musical genius.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how relevant his story still is. I mean, a lot of our listeners, they've lived through some pretty big changes, too.
Right.
Think about the technology we have now compared to when we were younger.
Totally. We've seen the world transform with political and social upheavals.
Yeah, and Beethoven lived through that kind of stuff, too. The French Revolution, the rise of Napoleon, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. It all influenced his music.
It's like looking in a mirror almost.
Ah.
We see ourselves in his struggles and triumphs.
Absolutely. And his music, it wasn't just about pretty melodies. He was grappling with big ideas, expressing emotions in a way that nobody had really done before.
So where do we even begin with a life this big? I guess we start at the beginning, right? Bonn, Germany, 1770. Enter Ludwig van Beethoven.
There he is. And right away, we see this interesting parallel with Mozart. Beethoven's father was also a musician.
But wasn't he a court singer struggling with alcohol?
Sadly, yes. His career never really took off. But similar to Mozart's dad, he was incredibly demanding, pushing little Ludwig really hard with music lessons.
Wow, that kind of intense pressure from a parent, you'd think it'd be too much for a child to handle.
You'd think so, right? But for some, it ignites this incredible creative fire.
Well, clearly it worked for Beethoven. But I imagine having the right mentor is crucial, too.
Oh, absolutely. And Beethoven did. He had Christian Gottlob Neff.
Ah, the mentor. Every hero's journey needs a wise guide, right?
Exactly. And Neff was much more than just a piano teacher. He introduced Beethoven to the big ideas of the Enlightenment. Think about it, concepts like reason, liberty, and progress.
Those were radical ideas back then, weren't they?
Oh, totally revolutionary. They were challenging the old ways of thinking, and you can hear that spirit reflected in Beethoven's music.
So Neff's influence went way beyond music then. It shaped Beethoven's entire worldview.
Absolutely. And through his connections, he actually helped Beethoven get a job playing the organ for the Elector of Cologne.
Whoa, hold on. Playing for such an important figure as a teenager, that's pretty impressive.
It was. And it really set the stage for his move to Vienna in 1792. That's when things really took off for him.
Vienna, the musical capital of Europe? But this was also just after Mozart's death, right? And the French Revolution was shaking things up everywhere.
Yeah, Vienna was a city in flux. Politically and musically, it was a time of great uncertainty, but also a time ripe for new ideas and new talent.
So Beethoven arrived at the perfect moment, ready to make his mark on the world.
And he did, but not by following in Mozart's footsteps. He forged his own path, embracing the spirit of change and fighting for his artistic independence every step of the way.
So he gets to Vienna, ready to make a name for himself. Did he just kind of pick up where Mozart left off?
Oh, not at all. Beethoven definitely learned from the greats. But he had his own style, his own way of expressing things.
And that's where those Enlightenment ideas come in, right?
Exactly. Think about it. Individual liberty, reason, progress. These were huge concepts back then. And Beethoven was all about challenging the status quo.
So his music, it was more than just notes on a page. It was about ideas and emotions.
Absolutely. And a perfect example of this is his Eroica Symphony. It's his third symphony, and it's just massive. Way bigger and bolder than anything Mozart had done.
I remember reading that he was going to dedicate it to Napoleon Bonaparte.
He was. He saw Napoleon as the symbol of revolution, the embodiment of those Enlightenment ideals.
But then Napoleon declared himself emperor.
Yeah, and that just shattered Beethoven's image of him. It was like a betrayal. And the story goes that Beethoven flew into a rage and ripped up the dedication page.
Wow, I can almost hear the fury in the music itself.
It's powerful, isn't it? The Eroica is full of this raw energy and drama. It's music that pushes boundaries.
So he was a bit of a rule breaker then.
Oh, for sure. He was constantly experimenting with form and harmony, expanding what a symphony could be.
And he didn't limit himself to just symphonies either, right? There were piano sonatas, chamber music, even an opera.
You're right. And this leads us to one of the most fascinating and tragic aspects of his life.
You mean his hearing loss?
Exactly.
Mm.
Imagine being a composer and slowly losing your ability to hear. It started in his late 20s and just got worse over time.
That must have been terrifying. How did he cope?
Well, we have these letters he wrote to his brothers in 1802. And he pours his heart out. He's in despair. He even admits that only his art prevented him from taking his own life.
It's hard to fathom the isolation he must have felt.
It was, but his determination was incredible. He found ways to work around it. He'd press his ear to the piano to feel the vibrations, and he relied more and more on his inner ear.
So the music never stopped, even as the world around him grew silent.
That's the thing. And this brings us to his only opera, Fidelio. He finished it in 1814.
I remember it's about a wife who disguises herself as a man to rescue her husband from prison.
Yes, and it's often seen as this celebration of freedom and justice, especially that famous prisoner's chorus.
But I think you mentioned that we need to consider the historical context.
Right. By 1814, Vienna was under a pretty conservative regime after Napoleon's defeat.
So maybe there's a deeper message hidden within Fidelio.
Exactly. The ending where freedom is granted by a ruler instead of achieved through revolution, it might reflect that political climate. And some even see the protagonist's imprisonment as a metaphor for Beethoven's own isolation because of his deafness.
It's amazing how art can have so many layers of meaning.
It really is. And as Beethoven's hearing worsened, his music grew even more complex and innovative. It's like he was wrestling with fate itself, pushing the boundaries of what music could express.
And what's remarkable is that as his music became more challenging, his audience actually grew.
It did. By the 1820s, he was a cultural icon. His image was everywhere, paintings, busts, you name it. He had become the ultimate romantic artist, the solitary genius struggling against adversity.
In his music, it resonated with a whole new generation of fans. They connected with that intensity and emotional depth.
Exactly. They saw him grappling with life's big questions. And it wasn't about pleasing wealthy patrons anymore. It was about this shared emotional experience between the artist and the listener.
Which brings us back to that incredible funeral in 1827. Thousands of people mourning the loss of a man who had become more than just a composer. He was a symbol of artistic triumph over suffering.
And that eulogy by Franz Grillparzer, the playwright, it's fascinating because it doesn't mention God at all. It focuses entirely on Beethoven's artistic legacy.
It's like art itself had become this secular religion in the Romantic era.
A very astute observation. And nowhere is this more evident than in Beethoven's Final Symphony, the ninth, completed in 1824.
Yeah, the Ninth Symphony. With that amazing ode to joy, it's become like this anthem of hope for the whole world, hasn't it?
It really has, but even with a message as powerful as joy, there's still so much complexity there. The text Beethoven used is actually from a poem by Friedrich Schiller.
Oh yeah, Schiller the Enlightenment guy.
That's him. But you know what's interesting? Schiller was really inspired by those ideals at first, but then he saw what happened with the French Revolution and how it turned violent.
So it kind of disillusioned him.
Exactly. So the Ode to Joy, it's not just this straightforward happy song. There's this tension between hope and disappointment, this struggle between striving for a better world and recognizing the darkness that's still out there.
And to think Beethoven put all this into music while he could barely hear anything, it's incredible.
It really is, that image of him conducting the premiere and he can't even hear the orchestra or the applause. It's so powerful.
It just shows you the power of art to overcome any obstacle. So why should we still care about this guy today? I mean, it's been centuries.
Well, for me, Beethoven's story reminds us that true genius, it often comes from facing huge challenges. His deafness, his struggles to find patrons, the crazy political times he lived in, all of that fueled his creativity and pushed him to make groundbreaking music that we're still moved by today.
So it's like his limitations actually helped him create something extraordinary.
In a way, yes. And I think we can all relate to that. We've all had to overcome obstacles in our own lives, right? We've all had those moments where we had to dig deep and find that inner strength.
Absolutely. And Beethoven's music, it also reminds us of the power of art to connect us across time and cultures.
Think about it. Millions of people all over the world are still touched by music created by a man who couldn't even hear it himself. That's pretty amazing.
It is. It makes you wonder what we're all capable of when we embrace those challenges and tap into our own potential.
Exactly. If Beethoven could create masterpieces in silence, just imagine what we can achieve when we harness our own resilience and find our unique voices.
It's been a real journey exploring Beethoven's life and music. It's inspiring and humbling all at the same time.
I agree. He was a true innovator, and his story is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of Beethoven.
If you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend listening to his symphonies, reading his letters, and just diving into the history of that era. It's a fascinating world to explore.
Thanks for joining us. And remember, within each of us lies the potential for greatness. It might not be composing symphonies, but it's there waiting to be discovered.